If that relic ever breaks, the old keeper once whispered to her, the world will remember who you really are. The memory echoed in Leora Vale's mind as the silver bell of the Moon Ascension Festival rang across the valley, its clear tone rolling through the towering pines and over the stone terraces of Blackthorn Ridge, where hundreds of wolves had gathered under the pale glow of the rising moon. Lanterns hung from cedar posts, their warm light flickering against polished stone, and the scent of pine smoke, roasted venison, and night-blooming jasmine drifted through the cool mountain air. Alphas stood near the front of the ceremonial plaza in dark-tailored coats. Betas filled the middle rows laughing and trading stories, and the Omegas were quietly placed along the edges where the shadows touched the ancient walls. That was where Leora stood. She kept her hands folded around the small relic resting against her chest, a pendant of pale stone set in a thin ring of old silver that looked simple enough to anyone passing by, but its surface carried faint lines that glimmered whenever moonlight brushed across it. She had worn it every day of her life, guarded it through storms and winters and lonely roads, and though many had asked about it, she had never given an answer. Tonight, however, more eyes lingered on it than usual. A pair of beta girls walking past slowed just long enough to glance at the pendant before one of them gave a quiet laugh. "Look at that," she said under her breath, though loud enough for others nearby to hear. "The relic girl is here again." The other tilted her head with a smirk. An Omega guarding some ancient treasure. Hull! A sudden breeze swept through the plaza, lifting the edges of banners bearing the Blackthorn crest, and for a brief moment the relic warmed in her palm, a faint pulse passing through the stone like a slow heartbeat. Leora inhaled sharply and glanced around, her instincts sharpening even though the festival music had only just begun. Her direction with an amused smile. "That is her," he said quietly. "The one who thinks she is guarding something important." His friend chuckled and crossed his arms. "It looks like a souvenir from a roadside shop. Gathering." He was speaking quietly to one of the elders, his expression calm and thoughtful, but with each step he moved nearer the place where the shadows met the lantern light. Yet they carried the same familiar disbelief that followed Lyra everywhere she went, of the plaza where dancers had begun to circle the ceremonial fire bowl. Yet near the outer edge where Leora stood, the space had grown strangely still. Adrian Blackthorn slowed his steps as he approached the row of lantern posts that marked the quieter boundary of the gathering. His eyes had already noticed the faint glow slipping from between Leora's fingers, and though he had passed countless wolves during the evening, something about that small pulse of light held his attention. It was subtle, not bright enough for most people to notice beneath the lantern glow, but to him it looked like the reflection of moonlight trapped inside a stone. He paused a few feet away, studying the pendant with calm curiosity rather than suspicion. Leora felt her heartbeat quicken. She had hoped he would continue walking toward the far terrace or turn back toward the elders near the fire, but instead the Alpha King stepped slightly closer, the quiet authority in his presence making the surrounding conversations soften once again as nearby wolves realized he had stopped. His gaze lowered to the relic. "That is an unusual pendant," he said calmly, his voice steady and thoughtful rather than demanding. Leora tightened her grip around the stone, instinctively drawing it closer to her chest. "It is only a personal item," she answered quietly, hoping the explanation would end the moment before it grew into something larger. Adrian tilted his head slightly, his attention still resting on the faint light that flickered across the engraved surface. "It does not look ordinary," he replied. "May I see it?" The simple request sent a ripple of unease through Leora's chest. The relic warmed again as if reacting to the words themselves, its slow pulse now strong enough that she could feel the vibration through her fingertips. She shook her head gently, not in defiance, but in quiet urgency. "Please," she said softly, her voice barely louder than the lantern flames nearby. "It is better if no one touches it." A few wolves standing several yards away glanced toward them with mild curiosity, though none stepped closer. To them the exchange looked harmless, perhaps even polite. An Alpha King asking about a pendant, and a quiet Omega answering with modest caution. But Lyra felt the growing tension inside the relic like a gathering storm sealed within stone. Adrian noticed the change in her expression, and his curiosity deepened rather than faded. He was not a man who ignored mysteries, especially when ancient energies seemed to whisper just beneath the surface of something small and overlooked. "You speak as if the pendant carries a responsibility," he said, his tone calm but thoughtful. "That is unusual for a piece of jewelry." Leora hesitated. The old keeper's warnings echoed through her memory again, each word suddenly heavier than before. Some seals do not break from force, but from recognition. She slowly opened her hand just enough for the moonlight to brush the relic again. The pale stone glimmered faintly, the carved lines glowing like thin veins of silver beneath its surface. Adrian's gaze sharpened as he saw it clearly for the first time. "Where did you find this?" he asked quietly. Leora swallowed and held the pendant tighter, her voice barely steady as the pulse inside the relic surged again. "It was never meant to be found," she whispered. And as the final word left her lips, the ancient stone warmed once more, brighter than before, as if something long asleep had just begun to listen. The lantern light flickered gently across the outer terrace as Leora Vale stood frozen beneath the cedar pillar, her fingers wrapped tightly around the relic, while the warmth inside it continued to grow stronger with every passing second. Adrian Blackthorne did not move away after her quiet warning. Instead, he remained standing before her with calm patience, his attention fixed on the faint glow slipping through the narrow gaps between her fingers. The music of the festival continued behind them with cheerful rhythm, yet the space around them had grown strangely quiet, as if the air itself were holding its breath. Adrian studied the pendant again, and this time his curiosity carried a deeper focus. "You said it was never meant to be found," he repeated calmly. "That is a very unusual description for something worn openly at a festival." Leora hesitated. She had hoped her words would end the conversation, but the relic's steady pulse told her that the moment had already moved beyond quiet explanations. She slowly opened her hand again, allowing the pendant to rest against her palm while the moonlight touched its surface. The carved lines within the pale stone shimmered faintly like thin threads of silver beneath water. Adrian leaned slightly closer, not invading her space, but studying the object with careful interest. "This design is older than most artifacts I have seen," he said thoughtfully. "The markings look ceremonial, almost like the binding patterns used in ancient relics." Leora's heart tightened at his observation. Few people recognized those patterns, and the fact that he did made the warmth of the stone surge again beneath her fingers. "Please," she said quietly, her voice calm but firm. "It must remain whole." Adrian glanced up from the pendant to meet her eyes, and for a brief moment he seemed to measure the seriousness in her expression. "You speak as if it contains something important," he replied. "Or perhaps protects something important." Leora did not answer. The relic pulsed again, brighter this time, the soft glow now visible even beneath the lantern light. A few wolves passing nearby slowed their steps as they noticed the faint shimmer reflecting from the stone. One of the betas whispered quietly to his companion, curiosity replacing the earlier amusement. Adrian reached out slowly, his hand stopping just short of the pendant as he studied its surface more closely. He did not touch it yet, but the nearness alone made the relic's pulse quicken again like a bell struck softly in the distance. "This energy," he said quietly, almost to himself. "It feels familiar." Leora felt a wave of alarm rise in her chest. The old keeper's warning echoed louder now in her memory, each word carrying the weight of years of careful silence. Recognition can awaken what force cannot break. She tightened her hand again, pulling the pendant slightly closer to her chest. "Please do not touch it," she repeated softly. "The seal must remain unbroken." Adrian's eyes narrowed slightly in thought, not in suspicion but in genuine curiosity. "Seal," he repeated. The word hung in the air between them for a brief moment, while the relic's glow brightened another fraction beneath the moonlight. Adrian looked once more at the stone, then at Leora's anxious expression, and something about the combination stirred a deeper question in his mind. Slowly, almost instinctively, he reached forward again, this time gently closing his fingers around the edge of the pendant as if testing its weight. The instant his skin brushed the ancient stone, the relic's pulse surged sharply through Leora's palm like a sudden echo from a forgotten age, and the faint silver lines across its surface flared brighter beneath the lantern light, as though something long silent had finally recognized the presence standing before it. The instant Adrian Blackthorne's fingers brushed the surface of the relic, The quiet pulse within the stone surged into a powerful rhythm that Leora Vale felt shoot through her palm like a sudden wave of heat. The faint silver lines carved into the pendant flared brighter beneath the lantern light, their glow no longer subtle but unmistakable now, spreading across the pale stone like veins of moonlight awakening after a long sleep. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. "Please," she whispered urgently, tightening her grip around the pendant. But the moment had already begun to move beyond her control. Adrian felt the shift as well. The ancient stone vibrated lightly beneath his fingertips, not violently, but with a steady strength that made it clear the relic was responding to his presence. His calm expression changed into focused curiosity as he lifted the pendant slightly to examine the glowing lines more closely. Around them the music from the festival continued, though several nearby wolves had begun to notice the unusual shimmer and had slowed their conversations to glance toward the terrace. The relic warmed further, its pulse growing faster with every passing second. Lyra remembered the old keeper's final warning with chilling clarity. When the seal awakens, it will recognize the presence it was waiting for. She tried once more to pull the pendant away, but Adrian instinctively steadied it with his other hand, not out of force but simple curiosity as he studied the glowing patterns. "This is reacting to something," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. "I can feel it." The warmth within the relic intensified again, spreading across Leora's fingers until it felt like holding a small piece of sunlight. The engraved lines across the stone now shone clearly enough that several wolves standing 20 feet away pointed toward the light with confused expressions. A soft humming sound began to rise from the relic, barely louder than the lantern flames flickering in the breeze. Adrian's brow furrowed slightly as he felt the vibration strengthen beneath his hand. "What exactly is this seal holding?" he asked quietly. Leora shook her head, her voice barely steady. "It is not holding something," she said. "It is holding someone." Adrian looked up at her, puzzled by the answer, and in that brief moment the relic's glow surged again with sudden intensity. The thin silver lines expanded across the stone like lightning branching through clouds, and a soft crack echoed from within the pendant itself. Leora felt the vibration travel through her palm, and her heart sank with a quiet certainty she had feared for years. The ancient seal was beginning to fail. "No," she whispered softly, though there was no anger in her voice, only a deep sense of inevitability. The relic had remained silent for decades, waiting for a moment when recognition would awaken it. Adrian's presence had done exactly that. The small stone pendant trembled once more between their hands, its glow bright enough now that nearby wolves had begun stepping closer with cautious curiosity. Adrian felt the final vibration pass through the relic like the last echo of a bell fading into silence. And then, with a delicate sound like crystal meeting stone, a thin fracture appeared across the glowing surface, spreading slowly through the ancient lines that had once held the seal intact for generations. The thin fracture spreading across the glowing surface of the relic seemed almost delicate at first, a narrow silver line drifting slowly through the ancient stone as though time itself had begun to move again after centuries of silence. Leora Vale felt the moment the seal truly failed. The warmth inside the pendant surged through her palm and up her arm like a sudden tide of light, not painful but overwhelming in its intensity. The humming within the relic deepened into a low resonance that vibrated through the quiet terrace and carried faintly into the plaza where the festival music had begun to fade as more wolves noticed the unusual glow. Adrian Blackthorne instinctively loosened his grip as the light brightened between their hands, his calm expression shifting into focused astonishment. The fracture widened slowly across the pendant until the pale stone separated along the glowing lines that had once held it together. Instead of falling apart like ordinary crystal, the relic opened like a shell, revealing a burst of silver radiance that spilled outward in soft waves of light. The lantern flames along the terrace flickered wildly, as the air itself seemed to ripple with ancient energy. Several wolves standing nearby stepped back in confusion as the glow illuminated the stone floor around Leora's feet. Yet the brightness did not spread outward for long. Instead it gathered around her. Adrian watched in silent disbelief as the silver light circled Leora Vale like a quiet storm of moonlight. The relic fragments rested in her open hand now, no longer pulsing, but dissolving slowly into shimmering particles that drifted upward into the glowing spiral surrounding her. Leora felt the change before she fully understood it. The steady weight she had carried inside her chest for years began to lift, as though an invisible door had finally opened. The strange stillness that had followed her through every gathering, every town, every quiet road of her life suddenly shifted into something vast and ancient stirring beneath the surface of her awareness. The scent in the air changed as well. Several wolves along the terrace lifted their heads instinctively, their expressions shifting from curiosity to stunned confusion as the familiar quiet presence of an omega faded and was replaced by something far older and far stronger. Adrian felt it too. The new energy radiating from Leora was calm, yet immense, like standing at the edge of a vast ocean beneath the moon. His instincts as an alpha stirred with unexpected recognition. The silver light surrounding her brightened one final time before slowly settling into a faint glow that lingered across the terrace stones. Leora opened her eyes again, though she did not remember closing them. The world looked clearer now, every lantern flame steady, every sound sharper, every breath filled with a sense of quiet power she had never felt before. Around the terrace, the wolves stood silent, watching her with expressions that carried confusion, awe, and something close to reverence. Adrian Blackthorne remained only a few steps away, his gaze steady but unmistakably changed. The ancient seal that had once hidden her presence had vanished with the relic, and as the final shimmer of silver light faded into the cool mountain air, the quiet Omega who had stood unnoticed at the edge of the festival was no longer there at all. The terrace remained silent long after the silver light faded, as if the night itself was trying to understand what had just happened. Lanterns continued to sway gently in the mountain breeze, their warm glow returning to normal, yet every wolf standing nearby could feel that something profound had shifted. Leora Vale stood at the center of the quiet circle of stone. Where the light had gathered moments earlier, her hand still open where the relic had once rested. The fragments of pale stone were gone now, dissolved completely into the air, leaving nothing behind except a faint trace of silver dust that slowly vanished beneath the moonlight. For the first time in many years, she felt the absence of the quiet weight she had carried with her every day. The invisible barrier that had muted her presence was gone. The energy now flowing through her was calm but vast, steady as the tide beneath the full moon above Blackthorn Ridge. Several wolves along the terrace lowered their gazes instinctively, their instincts reacting before their thoughts could fully understand what they were sensing. The scent in the air was no longer the gentle and overlooked presence of an Omega. It carried something ancient and unmistakable, a quiet authority that resonated deep within the instincts of every Alpha, Beta, and Omega standing in the lantern glow. Adrian Blackthorne remained where he stood, only a few steps away, his expression thoughtful and steady. The realization unfolding before him was unlike any mystery he had encountered before. The pendant had not simply contained power. It had concealed identity. The ancient seal had hidden the true nature of the woman who now stood before him. Leora slowly closed her hand, feeling the calm strength now moving through her breath and heartbeat with perfect clarity. She lifted her gaze and met Adrian's eyes. The quiet uncertainty that had once lived behind her expression was gone, replaced by a calm awareness that seemed far older than the moment itself. Around them, the wolves of the northern packs continued to watch in silence. One of the elders near the terrace edge took a cautious step forward, his silver hair catching the lantern light as he studied Leora with deep concentration. "The seal has lifted," he said softly, more to himself than to the crowd. His voice carried a tone of reverence that quickly spread through the watching wolves like a ripple across still water. Adrian lowered his head slightly in quiet acknowledgement, the gesture subtle, yet unmistakable to those who understood the traditions of the pack. It was not submission. It was recognition. The energy surrounding Leora Vale was not the wild force of sudden power. It was something older and steadier, a presence that felt as natural as the rising moon itself. Leora felt the attention of the entire terrace resting upon her, yet the weight of it no longer frightened her. The seal had hidden her true nature for many years, protecting both her and the world around her until the moment of awakening finally arrived. She turned her gaze briefly toward the open valley beyond the terrace where the distant pine forest stretched across the dark mountains under the silver sky. The night air felt different now, clearer, as though every breath carried the quiet promise of something long awaited finally beginning. Adrian spoke again after a moment, his voice calm but thoughtful. "It seems the relic was never meant to protect the world from you," he said quietly. Leora's expression softened slightly as she looked back toward him beneath the lantern light. "No," she replied gently. "It was meant to protect the world until the right time arrived." And as the moon rose higher above the silent ridge, every wolf standing in the lantern glow understood that the quiet moment on the terrace had marked the beginning of something far greater than a festival gathering. The silence on the terrace lingered even as the music of the Moon Ascension Festival slowly began to return in the distance, though softer now, as if the celebration itself understood that something sacred had just unfolded beneath the lantern light. Leora Vale stood calmly beneath the tall cedar pillars overlooking the valley, the silver moon hanging high above Blackthorn Ridge and casting a quiet glow across the stone terrace. The energy that had awakened within her had settled into a steady presence, no longer flashing with sudden light, but flowing through her like a deep current beneath still water. Wolves gathered along the edges of the plaza continued to watch with careful attention, their earlier laughter gone, replaced by the quiet respect that instinct often brings when something ancient reveals itself. Adrian Blackthorn remained a few steps away, studying the calm strength now surrounding the woman who had once stood unnoticed at the edge of the gathering. The change was unmistakable. The gentle uncertainty that once defined her posture had been replaced by a quiet confidence that felt as natural as the rising moon above them. Yet there was no pride in her expression, only clarity and calm understanding. One of the elders approached slowly across the terrace stones. His footsteps measured as he looked from Leora to the empty space where the relic had once rested. "For generations we believed the old seals were only stories," he said softly, his voice carrying across the quiet terrace. "But tonight we have witnessed the truth behind one of them." Several wolves lowered their heads slightly in acknowledgement of his words. Adrian stepped forward then, his movements steady and deliberate, stopping just within arm's reach of Leora. The lantern light reflected in his eyes as he studied her for a moment before speaking. "You carried that burden alone for many years," he said calmly. Leora looked toward the distant forest stretching across the mountainside, the cool night air moving gently through the lantern flames around them. "The seal protected more than just my identity," she answered quietly. "It protected the balance of the packs until the moment came when that balance was ready to change." Adrian considered her words carefully. The energy surrounding her was not threatening, nor was it overwhelming. It felt like the steady presence of something meant to guide rather than dominate. "And that moment is now," he said. Leora turned her gaze back toward the terrace where the gathered wolves waited in silence beneath the moonlit sky. The ancient restraint that had once hidden her presence was gone, but the purpose it had guarded remained clear in her mind. "Now the packs will remember the strength that was once forgotten," she replied gently. The breeze carried her words across the lantern light as several wolves instinctively lowered their heads in quiet respect. Adrian watched the moment unfold with thoughtful understanding. The night had begun as a celebration beneath the full moon, but it would be remembered for something far greater. The ancient seal had opened, the hidden presence it protected had awakened, and the quiet Omega who once stood unnoticed at the edge of the festival had revealed a truth older than the mountain itself. Leora Vale took a slow breath and lifted her eyes toward the silver moon glowing above the ridge. The long silence that had followed her life was over, and the path ahead now stretched open beneath the stars, waiting for the new chapter that had finally begun.